Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Valiant live stream. Thank you, regular viewers, for being here. We do it for you every week. And new viewers, we really hope you like our stuff and you want to learn more about us. You can watch past episodes on our YouTube channel, and you can also check us out at the Valiant Way /live for new episodes and also to watch recently recorded ones. Really quick, we are Valiant Technology. We are a managed service provider based in New York City, or an MSP, as we're known in the industry, and we have a national reach. Now, as you can tell, George Dowderman, our fearless leader, is not here today, but and I know if you came for him, I'm really sorry about that. But we have two guests to fill in. We've got Ricky Cicchini from Cloud Radial, and then our own valued Valiant team member, Ryan Loughran. Sorry, oh my God, Ryan Loughran.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
Great. And they're going to help us fill that void. Oh, Matthew Fox. Hello,
I
Matthew
just want to see if
Fox.
you're going to pronounce my name right. I'll see you guys.
Oh my God. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the live stream. And today we're going to talk about applications. I know we all have a lot to say about that, but before that, we've got one of my favorite segments, The Download with Justin Pincina.
And you're just showing off knowing my last name, too.
Oh, yeah. No, now I'm just going to say everyone's last name.
Yeah. All right. So this week on the download, I want to revisit what something that we've been talking about, which is the security incident that happened to Kaseya, which I don't want to focus on the details of the incident specifically, more sort of the reaction that we're seeing in the MSP industry and most of the tech sector, which in a lot of ways has been positive, and we've been seeing good changes. A lot of businesses are starting to adopt the not if but when attitude, which is something that we've said before is critical. It's really not if something happens, it's when it happens, and having this attitude and really helps you build a policy that shows both due diligence and due care, which are showing that you are taking care of your infrastructure, you're doing things that you can be reasonably expected to do. And one of the things that we're seeing with this fallout from this is that a lot of these businesses are making their security practices more transparent. They're coming forward and saying, well, these are the things that we're doing for our tools. These are the things that we're doing in our practice to help prevent and mitigate these types of issues. And this is our response plan. Or, again, not always... can't always go into all the details of the things that you're doing for this because it's not necessarily the best idea to make that public knowledge. But the fact that there is a response plan, and to say, well, our response plan includes things like XYZ. And we're seeing a lot of that, a lot more of that than we have in the past. And in some ways, that's comforting to know that there are these companies that have had these plans in place and are now letting everybody know that, oh yeah, we have this. We at Valiant use that same not if but when philosophy when we're building and designing systems and structures and putting our stack together for our clients. It's not just in the tools that we use, but in the way that you combine them. You can't prevent something from failing. It's going to fail at some point, but you can have mitigations in place for when they do fail. And it's core to that idea of stability within the pyramid. This you see in, like we talked about, in servers, having RAID and having redundant power supplies and having backups built in by design. But it's also in the way that we pick and use the tools that we use. We do use an RMM tool. It's a standard tool for our industry, but we don't rely on a single vendor for that management of the entire thing. So we use two different RMM tools, one for Mac and one for PC. But we also use a separate antivirus and EDR tool that's separate from that. And this lets the two of them act as a check and balance on each other. If one of them has a breach or something happens, we have the other tool as a way to help mitigate that. And so doing things with arson, we have other ways that we do that as well too. But we try to build those things into the way that we operate. And we like working with vendors that do similar things, that can build systems and have those policies in place where it's like, oh yeah, it's never built on the, oh yeah, it could never happen. It's built on the, well, here's ways that we are in place to prevent things from happening, and here's what we do if something happens. And I mean, to speak with Ricky here about Cloud Radial and their response to what had happened, and their reaction to it, I think was a great example of that. Where and Ricky, feel free to jump in, but I know Cloud Radial is not an RMM tool, so it's not doing anything. But there still was a response that was put together to talk about how some of that data is protected.
Mm-hmm. There is it's interesting, just in general, seeing how it unfolded. So, just for clarity's sake, for anyone watching this, Cloud Radial is a lot of things, namely what I kind of boil it down to is account management and just a client portal, right? So we're going to talk about it in depth in a little bit, but generally speaking, I work with a lot of different partners, different MSPs all over the world, and it's funny how this Kaseya thing really brought a lot of stuff to light, and mainly that, where it's just like when we're looking at the displaying of stacks and understanding like where holes are, how kind of everything fits together. Yeah, we're not an RMM, so we're not necessarily at the same risks, but it doesn't really matter as long as we store data, even if it's passing through. It's just levels of security that people are comfortable with. So when it breaks down to our stuff, I mean, people have asked me this all the time. It's just kind of comes down to general encryption of the data storage. You've got the isolation, right? The way the Cloud Radial works, again, not going super deep into mechanics, is we isolate each company and client kind of in its own little container. So generally speaking, think Titanic hulls, maybe not a great example, but kind of separated at least. And then you've got the compliance and data centers adhering to a bunch of stuff. I think GDPR. What is the other one? HIPAA. There's a couple other things that we're kind of compliant with in general. But as it kind of pertains to stacks and all that, like what you're saying, we're seeing a lot of people that are coming to us, especially after the Kaseya thing happened, and they're just like, wait, are you guys good? Wait, is our data happening? And again, I'm seeing everything from the one-man shops to the enterprises starting to like differentiate and kind of like hedge their bets in different areas so they don't put all their chips in one stock. And it seems to be not going anywhere. Like remote management, I don't think is budging. I think that's still something that people are just going to keep around for a long time.
Sure. And I think the Titanic hulls example is actually a great one, because to me the failure of the Titanic wasn't that it sank and that the hulls breached. It was that there weren't enough lifeboats. It wasn't planned for. If they had, that's the not if but when. If they had planned, well, when this, like, not try and make it so that it can't sink, make it so that when it sinks, something we're taken care of. And I think that's the same approach that that we're seeing Cloud Radial and a lot of companies take. That here's all the layers that we're putting in place, and here's what we're going to do to prevent those sort of things from happening, and here's what we do when something happens. Here's our process, and here's what we do. Here are the steps we take. And Cloud Radial and a lot of other companies have been making that information more available, and I think it is becoming more of a standard of something that small businesses are going to need to have, that ability to say, like, well, here's all the tools and all the things we have in place to help prevent something, and here's what we do when something happens. This is the process we take. And that I think wraps it up for this week's download.
Thank you so much, Justin. All right, so we'll move on to the subject of the episode. It's applications. First, we're going to do a broad view of what applications are. Marianne, do you mind taking this one for us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just as we were starting to talk, applications are essentially anything. It's computer software that carries out a specific task, and it's besides just having the computer operate. So it's a lot easier, I think, to give examples like Microsoft Word is an application, your games, Minesweeper is an application, Photoshop.
And they're just on phones, right? Is that?
No. A lot of people think applications apps, so they're thinking about all the different chat programs and you could put on your phone, but applications also applies to both things that are on your desktop. So we're talking Word, QuickBooks, things like that, and in the past it was kind of just that hardware-based stuff, but now we've obviously got local, mobile, and cloud. And the cloud ones, I mean, I said QuickBooks for desktop, but QuickBooks is also in the cloud, and that is an application. It's not just like, oh yeah, I've got an account. you're using an application. It has a specific function and a specific way of doing things. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about applications. Cloud Radial is an application, also, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say you can generally split, at least for talking for business purposes, you can kind of split applications into two major groups. There's common apps, which are things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or Keynote, or things that you're going to find that they're sort of standard that across the
Right.
board. And then we call line of business apps,
Mhm.
and they tend to be more specific to specific industries or specific tasks. And these are more commonly the type of apps that use like a server or a
Mhm.
database, like we talked about last week. They don't all. Sometimes they're smaller or not as common, and but they are generally considered something that's necessary to conduct business. QuickBooks is one that kind of straddles the two because it's super common. Everybody uses it. But I think it really also falls into a line of business app because it's
Mhm. Mhm.
necessary to complete a task within a specific part of the business that you're running in. Hey, man.
Yeah, hey, I'm back. I didn't like looking at 5 people on screen. It was a symmetry thing, so I'm just gonna hang out here for a minute.
Nice, welcome.
All right.
So that's pretty much. I'd say the distinction between those two types of applications, of breaking them down that
Let me
way.
go a little bit deeper in that because I think that something like QuickBooks is still very much general because accounting is a general function that's going to be found in any small business. I think if we're going to talk line of business applications, a good example could be like CAD software or something that an architect uses because it's very specific to their industry. Maybe
True.
software that's used for building templates for clothing design. That's part of the fashion industry. Those are really the line of business things. They're going to be the ones that you have never, ever heard of unless you're part of an industry like Razor's Edge. Like, unless you're working in a nonprofit doing fundraising, you've probably never heard of that before. That's really the true idea of the line of business application. That it's
I mean, even us MSPs have our own line of business applications.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
No one else knows about our type of ticketing system or anything like that.
Yeah.
Unless
even
you
up
also have
until-
something similar.
Up until recently, RMM as a line of business app that nobody outside of our industry really talked about. So,
But now everybody knows.
Yeah.
Secret's out.
But I think the important thing to distinguish is that whether it's a common app or line of business app or personal app or any of that, it still falls into those. It can be installed on a workstation. It can be installed on a mobile device. It can be installed on a server. It could be cloud. All of those things, being one of those things doesn't negate one or the other. So being a line of business app doesn't mean that it has to have a server and a database. It could be cloud. It could be mobile. It could be worked. It all depends on what your business is and how it operates.
Yeah, and apps could be very small, like we're talking, a small game on your phone. It doesn't do too much. Maybe you're just playing Pong against the computer, but it can also be really comprehensive and complicated, and that's why you might end up having a specific server designated to it. So,
or a cloud as well too. There's even for games, especially for mobile games, how many of them can you have to be connected in order to play because it's doing things online.
I have a separate folder for games I can do offline. So when I'm on the subway,
me too.
Well, and I think it's just. Oh, am I echoing? I just want to make sure. Okay, sorry for a second. What I think, summing all that up, it's sort of applications are all around us, like many stars in the sky. Excuse the metaphor, but they play a key role in how we do business, and it's important for us to be aware of what applications you have and what condition they're in, if they're getting the proper updates, and that it's something you can receive support on if you need a hand. And what better way to ensure a healthy level of awareness than to talk about licensing? We're going to pass it off.
So software licensing can be some of the most complicated. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's complicated,
Right.
depending on the type of license. Cough, cough, Microsoft. But really, what it boils down to is that the software license is the thing that you are actually buying when you buy software. It's what's granted to you when you pay for a piece of software, giving you permission to use it. So like when you buy a program, when you buy a game, a software, even if you're getting, that game on a disc, you don't have access to all the source code or everything about it. You don't have the ability to distribute it. You don't own all that. You have the thing that you're allowed to use, and that license is what governs that. It's just like how if you buy a Blu-ray movie, you're allowed to watch it. You can watch it as much as you want, but you're not allowed to charge people admission to show it to them. That's that FBI warning thing in the beginning, all those rules with it. And that's the same thing. You're buying a license to play that Blu-ray, not a license to distribute it. Or another way to think of it is when you buy a train ticket, you're buying the right to use the train at that time. You're not actually buying the train itself. You don't get to do whatever you want. You have a license for that.
I love that metaphor. It just shows that, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
and
my
also-
train, right?
Yeah, it's also licensing, like you said, it includes specific rules and stipulations. And that's the same reason why you can get kicked off a train if you're acting too unruly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Or if you
it's
didn't
not
buy
a
a
guarantee. It actually does have these rules and, things associated with it that you have to comply to as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's, I said there's different licensing models for how software tends to be sold. There's really, I'd say three. And I know, Ryan, I know you have a lot of experience with this from the service desk side, having to deal with licensing.
Like you said, it's complicated. I guess the three main ones we have are like perpetual licensing, timed licensing, and cloud. And then kind of mixed in there is subscription or volume licensing versus what we in the industry like to call like box copies. A good example is like kind of think of it like buying a car. You buy the car, it's yours. You can do whatever you want with it. You could change it around. You could give it a new color. Maybe it came with a plan or maintenance. Maybe it didn't. However, if you lease a car, that comes with a maintenance plan and usage for a specific amount of time. That's the term of a lease or the term of the license in the case of software. It's you're only allowed to have that car when you lease it for a certain amount of time. You could renew it just like with licensing. You buy a yearly license to Photoshop, you're allowed to use that piece of software, Photoshop, for just a year. You don't own the software, you own the ability to use the software. We like to go with subscription-based licensing for a lot of our clients, just because it's the overhead is way less. It's easier for maintenance, and it's easier just to use for the end user. I mentioned it before with box copies. That's when you are given basically a single-use license. You're given basically a box. You install it on your computer, but you could only install it on that computer. Meanwhile, if you go subscription-based, you can install it on this computer dies, move it to the next one. Yeah, that's kind of how licensing works with software. Justin said with Microsoft, it's confusing sometimes because there's
different.
It's a bad example, but
they have all three of those. All of those options are the same thing. You can buy a box copy of Office that you can install on one computer and then at one time, and that's it.
Yep.
You can buy the volume licenses, which they're doing away with, but you could buy volume licenses, which says, well, you can install, up to 500 copies of this on 500 machines using the same thing. Or you could do cloud. You do Office 365 and pay a subscription every month, and you can install it on 5 machines per person. And we don't really care how many computers you install it on, because in order to use it, you have to be logged in and paying for a license. So all three for the same piece of software, just depending on what you're doing and what makes the most sense.
Yeah,
I
and I wanted to add.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying another reason that we usually recommend subscription is because, especially for small to medium businesses, you need to be more flexible. You need to be able to scale both up and down. Because you don't want to be paying for, X number of copies of a Word when you had to do a staff reduction and you're still paying for this Word for nobody. So that's also one reason why we do it, because if you're paying for all that stuff up front, it can be kind of costly. And it's also a lot easier for us to, just go turn it up one than have to obtain the license and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things I've heard while you guys are talking about the different types of licensing was just a tonal change when talking about box copies. So I think it might be a good time to say we don't exactly like box copies. Aside from functional issues around the ability to scale, like Marianne was just talking about, there's also the ecological concern. Yeah, I know you guys have been there before. We've all got stacks of these boxes around the office. At a previous job, I once made a fort at my desk using box copies of Windows like 2013 or something like that, and just glued them together and just had like a little dome over me because of how much space they take up. It's paper, it's plastic, it's all this stuff that's going to get tossed someplace once you install the software anyway.
Yeah,
So
well, no, you
honestly,
should. You need to keep that piece of
you
paper
keep
that
the-
came
you
in the
keep
box.
card inside the box.
Yeah.
Put that away in a file, and then all
That's
the
the
other stuff
actual
becomes your new
license.
Yeah.
becomes your new
Uh,
office summer home at your desk. Yes, absolutely.
And that we've in the past, have seen that where people are like going through a Microsoft audit back in the day where you had to produce all the cards for all the box copies you bought, and if you didn't have one, it was, well, you don't have a license for this software. It's technically pirated at that point.
Yeah.
'cause you
I gotta
Right.
say, I do appreciate that they do now at least have like that card-like insert that comes in the boxes as opposed to a regular piece of paper, because having that card and its kind of like rigidity when you hold it goes, okay, this is important. There's some
there's
reason
something to keep. But yeah, that's go ahead.
Well, Justin, I was wondering, you mentioned pirated, which is a fun word. Sorry,
It is.
but I was wondering if you could explain that, like how can a software be pirated, and like what can we do about that?
Pirated software is just any software that you have that you don't have a valid license to use. It's at its least troublesome, you run the risk of getting audited and having to pay a fine. I know the place I used to work at, one of the clients had a horror story of getting dinged for Microsoft licensing, and their punishment was they weren't allowed to buy any Microsoft products for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that so at the least damaging level, you've got that. At the other end of the spectrum, pirated software is by nature, it's damaged, it's broken, it's not secure,
It's
it's not
dangerous,
receiving updates. It's in order to get around the tools that are used to validate the licensing, the code needs to be modified. So at this point, you really don't know what else is being put into it. You really don't know what else is happening, and how easy is it for someone to slip malware into that? How easy is it for technically the software itself at that point is malware because it's doing something that it's not supposed to do.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually talk about this a lot in our security training. Like, you can't, even if you're like, oh, HBO's got a ton of money, I'll download Game of Thrones. Okay, that's way too old of a reference. I'm sorry. But at the same time, like, it's not just, the legal ramifications, which of course is important, but you could damage your own computer. You're downloading something, you don't know what everything they're bundling in, or I mean, it's more so with software than something like that, but like, yeah, it's a problem, and it's not secure, and it's not secure by design.
Yeah, and I think it ties into what we've talked about in the past too with Shadow IT, where people will find ways to do their
job.
Yeah, to do their job. That if you aren't able to provide them with the tools that they need, or show them how to use the tools that you're providing with them, people will find ways to get the things that they need. And if the way that they come across that is by finding some pirated software or using some pirated software, that's something that can happen. And I know we use tools in Cloud Radial, our client portal tool that we're using to help look at what software is on machines and make sure that everything is licensed.
Yeah, I guess again, that's something else that comes into play a lot when it comes to piracy. Like you mentioned, Shadow IT is kind of rampant. It's nuts how many times, not just the MSPs, a lot of times the IT provider can tell that they, it comes up to a concern themselves, but even the business themselves, they want to have visibility on what's going on, and they'll see that. We've seen instances of it being like, hey, you have 5 Office licenses, but you have 30 computers with Office on them. Something's up, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah.
And in their portal, they would go in and be like, is this wonderful? It's like, let me tell you why this is not wonderful. Why this is not right.
So I guess is there a recourse if you suspect something's happening in your job, like maybe there's pirated software and maybe you don't have the authority to change it, or is there a recourse for an employee who wants to report it so that it doesn't go on unchecked?
You know, yeah, I don't. It varies between styles of organization. I mean, you and I have spoken before too about
Right.
like general using Cloud Radio, but this is just a general thing about like, do you bring it up? Do you have the conversation with them, with your clients as like, you know, a consultant basically going like, hey, I've noticed this, can you do it there? Or do you leave the onus on the people themselves to raise the hand up and go, I spotted something, I don't know. And again, in Cloud Radio, they could open up a ticket, right? They could basically
Right. Yeah, that's a great point.
issue.
Hmm.
I got a problem with this. Or something needs to be looked at. From your perspective, that might be something too. I think, again, the core problem here is that with the sprawl of the sheer amount of stuff that you guys are looking after now, it's just nuts. It's really hard to keep an eye on it. So
Yeah.
you need some kind of a scrying lens to be able to put a spotlight on it in some way.
Yeah.
Well, if we're able to discover something, we will always talk to our clients because we,
Oh,
you know, we're their consultants. We want them to be doing the right thing, and we know that the consequences can be bad. But there are things. I mean, you know, at other companies, I've known people, and actually, I believe Matt has had some sort of experience with one of their something. But
Absolutely. I worked at a place where half the software was pirated the day I walked in, and management had no understanding because there wasn't a clear line of communication between the former IT leadership and them. And came in, said, look, you know, I've only been here like 6 hours. I just finished having lunch in the kitchen for the first time, but I can tell you right now, you've got, I don't know, maybe 80 licenses of like Adobe Office that are not valid. And it goes with a lot of the creative suite stuff we got going on. So, you know, let's talk about what we're going to do in our first meeting next week. And if not, I'm just going to give these folks, the Software and Information Industry Association, a call because
There it is.
I refuse to be held liable for your lack of insight in the past.
absolutely.
And, you know, it's a rough conversation sometimes to have, but it's a lot less rough than the fines that are going to be faced. And
Yes.
honestly, if you go to your
Adobe
employer and
doesn't
say,
mess
look,
around.
Oh yeah.
this is, it's like West Side Story. You're walking down the street, you're like people snapping their fingers as a little switchblade comes out.
That's the
No,
IT
not
world.
really, not really. Don't revoke my Creative Cloud license, please. I love that. But you know, it can be a difficult conversation to have, but it's an important one because of the downfall that can occur should something happen. Especially when people don't necessarily realize that they're doing something wrong. I think that's the
Exactly,
most important
yeah.
part to remember. It's not like we're sitting here going, not paying that monthly fee. It's no, my trusted IT guy installed that software so I can do my job. I'm not really going to I'm not going to question that.
Right. I think a good point that was made by this and that we've been talking about is like people need to do their jobs. It's not like, and like, not to make a bad joke, but it's not like they're like, we're modern pirates. It's not, it's not that. It's they need to do their job. They're going to find ways to do their job. Make sure as an employer, as a small business, you're providing the resources and you're sourcing them responsibly. Also, buying the licenses legally will always be better than having to pay the fines or deal with the fact that you're operating on malware later on. I think
any of
that's
the consequences that
End
come
of
built
day,
in.
it's due care. It's any
Yeah.
part of running a healthy business.
Yeah.
It's literally, it comes down to that.
Yeah, one thing that's overlooked a lot, even though it's not an application, but we're talking about licensing and piracy, it's font licensing. We work with a lot of creative companies,
Absolutely.
and I've had this conversation many times with them. Their employees, they're trying to do a pitch. They're trying to create something, so they just download some fonts. Eventually, that pitch goes into production. It gets produced. It's published, but they're using a pirated font. They then get called by the creator. It's like, hey, why are you using my font? I don't see that you have a license. So it's super important, especially in the creative industry, that you pay attention
Ryan,
to what
I'm going to
fonts.
interrupt you really quickly because you're making a really good point to the point where I'm grabbing my head and I'm having a hard time remembering the manufacturer of Universal Type Server. Extensys.
Extensive.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you. They're not here. We don't really do a whole lot with them. That's my fault. We're going to in the near future, but I think it's worth mentioning them because they are really the solution.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
License
Yeah.
management.
Mhm.
So
yeah, and like I was saying,
give me a
most
call.
people don't realize it. You know, they're like, or even they might be like, "Oh, this is a free font, but it's free for personal use, not commercial use." And if
Exactly.
you're a business, you're not allowed to use that. So,
Yep.
In fact, just really quickly, even the fonts that we use for our corporate, style, they're all open source because I don't want to have to deal with that. I mean, that's why we use Poppin. That's why we use some of the other fonts that we have.
that's
Is
why I go to
because
the
they're
totally
available.
free pic site or the graphic image site.
So we've talked about how essential applications are, how they like we use them to do all of our jobs, not just us, but in all these ways, every industry has all these specialized applications. We've got the issue of piracy. Sounds like we've got to manage this and we've got to make sure these are accessible, right? And, I mean, but that's where, Ricky, who works at Cloud Radial, that's sort of where Cloud Radial comes in, if I'm not wrong. Right,
That
Ricky?
is correct. I think kind of in brief, because this whole conversation can be summed up with it's a shared responsibility. Obviously, we've been talking about the brunt of our stuff, but ultimately it's like you got to put it out there. One, with a client portal like Cloud Radial, you're going to make a lot of those things accessible in the first place. So if you can't at least force their hand, you can at least point them in the right direction, going, these are the right resources to use. And when it comes to stuff like piracy, I think, again, it's ignorance usually that's more dangerous than malice. That's a larger one. So stuff like training, that's also accessible in there, right? You can spin up your own. You guys have, a lot of stuff in there in the first place. Just letting them know what something pirated looks like is what is malicious, what's not. Where is an okay place to go get software? Is Google the result good? Not always, right? And then when it comes time to track the issues, to log them and stuff, being able to fire off a couple tickets and see them, right? Obviously, that's part of the portal. But I think, again, this whole conversation can be summed up in kind of a central repository where you can kind of manage this thing, whether it's licenses or training or whatever. I think clients, non-technical people, just need a way to simplify, because just in these 30 minutes we've been talking about it, it's a lot of stuff, especially for non-technical people.
Yeah.
I think too, having that central place, that central hub, in order to access everything, helps combat piracy and shadow IT, not just from seeing what's there, but by making all of the tools that are available to your employees all available in one place. Make it easy for them to be like, oh, I log into my one portal, I log in here, and it's got links to all the tools that we use. It's got downloads for the tools that we use. It's got instructions for the tools that we use. And if I need a tool, there's a button here that says request new software, and goes through the actual channels of making that request rather than running through it. And by for us, being able to customize that for our clients, for each client, to make sure that it fits their needs as like that hub to work from, I think that really goes a long way to get at the root of what's causing shadow IT, that's causing piracy in places to begin with.
It really it highlights the malicious actors a lot better, because again, when you kind of have a way to remove the, not their fault, but their ignorance out of it, right? It's like, I didn't know how to get there. It's like, well, I put it in front of you. Well, I made it access. And like, you give them a clear path. Then you're left with a lot easier way of going, like, well, after that, I saw you did the training. I still see you have 18 copies of Pirated WinRAR.
Now we know who maybe knows what's going on.
You pirate WinRAR?
Yeah, that was like the worst example ever. Pirated WinRAR. They wanted to be pirated. Come on, let's get real. That was inappropriate, but it's still true.
I just want to say we're about 4 minutes over, but this has been such a great conversation, and that usually happens when we have great guests. We go a little bit over, and I wanted to say that Ryan is actually going to be on a webinar about Adigy and Cloud Radial, or with Adigy and Cloud Radial, and you can find them there Thursday, July 29th at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time.
1 p.m. Eastern. Yep.
Great, thank you. So look out for that if you liked what you heard today, and then our next stream, George will be back. So, although we do miss him, and our team is going to answer some questions, some of the most common questions about Wi-Fi and 5G. George loves this topic, so he's coming back just in time. And they're questions that we received from you, and we're going to dive a little further into the history of wireless communication, which is always really fascinating. And so please tune in for that. Again, if you enjoyed our stream, please like and subscribe, and check us out on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please send us a message. We are very responsive, and we're excited to clarify and guide people when it comes to IT. And as always, visit us at thevaliantway.com to learn more about us and our services. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, guests. Matt, thank you for jumping into and making us more of like a Brady Bunch band. I appreciate that.
Anytime. I'm always here.
I know.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Bye,
Thank-
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good one.